The world of Emerald Cascade in 1496 is quite noticeably different from our own in the same year. I'm sure many who look upon this map have many questions, and there is a very high probability that I have answers for them. However, if I were to try and address every lingering thought, this video would be several hours long. So I primarily intend to break down how each nation factors into the story of Sanguine Frost. First, a disclaimer. Despite the text in the upper left corner, this is not the entirety of the known world of Norwa. I have the text there as more or less a contextualizing force to give the image a more focused scope. The reality is, the base form is a map I obtained from Wikipedia, which was originally blank until I colored it in using Pixel Studio. Unlike what the map suggests, Norwa was acutely aware of Abyssinia, Ethiopia, and South Arabia, as that was where their coffee came from, not to mention the large Habesha diaspora in Bergen, whom we first meet in the third chapter. Norwa is also generally aware of the situation in India, which in this era was nominally united under one Tamil regime, but de facto cut up into four pieces by feuding Tamil princes, all brothers, with differing loyalties. Norwa would be less privy to the goings-on in Indonesia, which were undergoing massive internal revolutions due to technology introduced from India, and even less privy to China, which in this timeline was still under the Ming dynasty. China was largely, though not entirely, isolated from the first 700 years or so of the alternate history. Japan was a vague lip. West Africa was a vague mystery to Norwa, as in the 1490s most ports built on its coast were staffed by Hispania, who charged Norwa's ships exorbitant prices to dock, so often Norwa would simply overlook the region. By extension, Norwa has slightly more knowledge of sub-Saharan African states, though not by much. They knew of the Kingdom of Congo, and at this time would know the Indian Ocean kingdoms of Kilwa and Pate. There are writings from Norwish captains sent to find a route to India, who noted the constant hostility between the city-states, surmising that his fleet was spared all destruction purely because the Africans knew the Norwish vessels did not belong to rival cities. Nonetheless, the same diary later has the writer express much relief upon landing in an Abyssinian port, presumably Mogadishu. Lastly, Norwa was very aware of North America, having discovered it in 1457 and cultivating its northern coastal lands ever since. They would also be vaguely aware of the Caribbean, the Cane Islands, having been found in 1478 by Gokrim Gobekwood, who notably had one Ubras Margatil as his bodyguard. The Caribbean is still largely untapped due to distance and focus on the Mediterranean in the 1480s, but Norwish merchants as well as other leaders of Europe recognized the Cane Islands' material wealth, especially in regards to tobacco. Although Norwa does not know about the Aztecs at this time, the earliest reports of Utlingich friars stumbling upon the fringes of what seemed to be an awe-inspiring civilization first began appearing in 1493. Norwa may know there is much more land farther south of the Caribbean, but has not yet commissioned any expedition down there. They would have no idea about the Incas, nor the Brazilian natives. With all that out of the way, let's begin with the country labeled France, and then go sort of counterclockwise until we circle back to Norwa. Remember that I will primarily be focusing on each nation in relation to the core story of the novel, so several will be more or less glossed over. France is labeled such due to dynastic inheritance. At the time of the novel, inhabitants of the area would most certainly identify as being French, or perhaps Frankish, though given the region you'd be correct in thinking the population is primarily Dutch-speaking. In the 1000s, the different Frankias from Charlemagne's time formed a noticeable divide. The wealthier Francophone population moved south and eventually formed Carolingia, leaving a power vacuum in the north, which was then occupied by a Belgian dynasty called De Marck. Initially, the realm also encompassed Normandy, Orléans, and even Paris, but over time it shrank to mainly comprise of the Low Countries. Historians today refer back to the kingdom as Normandy and Holland, rather than France, purely to avoid confusion, not unlike historians of our timeline giving the name Byzantium to the Eastern Roman Empire. France is currently ruled by King Willem IV de Marck, and is important to the plot for being the headquarters of the Alemannic Order, a multifaceted organization of church-minded people who try to provide a more boots-on-the-ground approach to enforcing church policies, often chasing down church fugitives in other realms, whilst backed by papal commission. One such bishop, Gijsbert van Lyck, was assigned to track down a fugitive who was suspected to be living in Norwa. and he will factor into the plot relatively early on. The Celtic Empire is exactly what it sounds like, but that doesn't stop it from being one hell of a doozy to explain. Essentially, the timeline's focus tracks with the Celts, using the Empire as a fulcrum from which the rest of the timeline is compared against. As you may have gathered from intro disclaimers or brief descriptions within the chapters, the timeline's earliest divergence concerns the Empire. In the 760s, a young girl named Flann is rescued from drowning in the River Liffey by a Wyneld clansman, who then adopts her, as he has no children of his own. The pertinent point here is that she was not saved in our timeline, therefore her story ended there. But in this timeline, she inherits the few small holdings her Wyneld guardian held titles to. But his relatives were very unhappy with her inheriting Wyneld lands, so on top of trying to muscle her out, they forced her to pick a new clan name. So she rebranded herself Flann Woruban. Though, through various storied, though controversial and likely exaggerated accounts, Flann married into Pictish nobility, then stumbled into a Byzantine prince and married him, then went on to mastermind a gradual and methodical takeover of Ireland, crowning herself High Queen in 810. Despite spending her reign from then on fighting back against rebellious clans, her progeny continued to rule the island as a whole even after her death in 821. The Celts expanded to take Wales in 859, then Brittany in 864, and lastly Scotland in 879, at which point the empire was declared. A whole lot of stuff happened, and in 933 the Celts launched an invasion of Norway that lasted almost 3 decades, before declaring it a new merchant republic, Norwa, modeled after the republic in Loch Garman. The Celts then also liberated Iberia from the Umayyads, and installed Ibruni leadership in the peninsula, planting the seed for Hispania. The Celts also conquered the hinterlands around Jerusalem to protect the city from being retaken by the Musaid Caliphate. Long story, missing so many details there, but let's just say that seed is what created the Egypt on the map. The Celts also eventually conquered Sweden and Finland for various reasons over the centuries. However, all of these lands gained independence over time, hence the empire not covering half of Europe. In the story, it is still a force to be reckoned with, but significantly weaker than Hispania, which is a major reason Imperator Cascina of Hispania is currently attempting to unite the crowns with Audrey Ademar. The Celts are mainly important for one of their constituent realms, Loch Garman, the eternal rival to Norwa, who played a significant role in Odd's backstory, but will also play a role later down the line on top of introducing major characters. And yes, the Celts also own Hamburg. Another long story, moving on. Carolingia is a southerly half of the two Frankias, being primarily Francophone and, as the name implies, at least originally, ruled by the Caroline dynasty spawned of Charlemagne. After the big breakup of the Frankias in the 1000s, the southern side was divided into 3 realms, Aquitaine, Loire-Maine, and Alpa. Eventually, the king of Aquitaine's son, Gaucher, united the 3 as Carolingia in 1178, following a papal decree. Carolingia would be one of the 2 principal sides in the infamous War of Empires. A conflict so incredibly massive and dense despite only lasting 8 years that I cannot possibly hope to get into it without this long-ass video suddenly tripling in length. Long story short, they won, shaky co-rule, peaceful Urban takeover, clergy rebellion, and finally, the place becomes a theocracy in the 1350s. Not just a theocracy, but one of the 3 in Europe established a crystallized buildup of cardinal factions that had been bubbling for literal centuries by that point. In 1496, Carolingia is still a theocracy, headed by High Archbishop Klaus, though currently they are not a very prosperous realm, with Hispania being more powerful and easily choking out their economy. Poliguria is a breakaway kingdom of the Papal Empire, originally spearheaded by the merchant lords of Genoa, specifically to fight against Pope Daedalus, after he forced them off their own estates to build farms and training camps in preparation for the War of Empires. Eventually, Genoa splintered itself as well, but the 2 get along decently. In the story, it's only really important in its role as an awkward ally of Norwa, whereas Genoa was Norwa's enemy. In this capacity, Trademaster Enric Magalda was able to undermine Genoa's influence by having King Amadeo confront the Duke of Sardinia to have Odd released from prison in 1484. Odd maintains that the prison was hands down the worst dungeon he'd ever seen in his life, let alone endured. The current king of Poliguria is the aforementioned Amadeo Gialdin. Prussia is where the Pope lives and reigns. The church is absurdly strong in this region, to the extent that the Duchess of Padua, Vittoria Maricini, has enough influence to shake up the composition of Central Europe. The importance of Prussia on the story more or less begins and ends with Maricini. The current pope is Vitalian IV, who was born a Carpathian man named Grigri. Amalfi is another rival merchant republic, however its importance to the overall plot will only become apparent much later on. España is Hispania. Both Spain and Portugal, after having been liberated by the Celts, were also united by them, with resulting demographic integration. In 1109, the Bourbons seized the empire from the Bruni, and now, in 1496, España is making its second attempt to unite the crowns with Tara, the Celts, but not very successfully. España doesn't yet have any direct impact on the story, but they are indirectly responsible for an early development in the plot. The Ewe refugees in Vregna are effectively marooned in an alien city with no allies after an Espanish loan ship dumped them at the docks after discovering them as stowaways. The refugees were attempting to flee the wrath of a Ghanaian warlord who is imposing draconian and unfair laws on local families purely to appease the market España had manufactured by establishing trade ports on the West African coast. España is currently ruled by Imperator Casina Oruava. Egypt is yet another doozy to explain. What you absolutely need to know is it's now Catholic, but facing tensions because the expanse you see on the map is the result of relatively recent conquests, the 1420s to the 1460s. Currently, it is ruled by King Arif Arubania, yes, the Bourbons, who is in his twilight years. The realm is important in the background story as being the crux of Ad's great achievement, the Great Salt Route, beginning in Hajar, which is Riyadh, and rappelling along the North African coast until it wraps around to head to Nyorwa. This insanely profitable route funded the colonies in North America, grew Nyorwa's prosperity, and angered the other merchant republics who were cut out of the deal. Martin is also from Egypt, originally coming from a town outside of Alexandria. Mali is Mali, a continuation of the Mali Empire founded sometime in the 900s. It is currently ruled by Lahilatul II. Suleiman Arabia is Christian-ruled but largely Muslim-populated, the Suleiman tribe being old Tigrinian nomads ejected from the Abyssinian colonies in southern Arabia. It is currently ruled by King Nagash Suleiman. The realm is headquartered in the city of Hajar and largely built on an economy of salt trading. The salt route begins here. St. Constantine, short for High Archbishopric of St. Constantine, is a militant theocratic state descending from Byzantium after the latter had the office of Basileus completely shuttered by an empowered clergy backed by the Pope. In light of this development, which occurred in 1376, Persia broke away once again and led by a more traditional monarchy. However, in 1478, the region came back under Constantinian purview amidst the conquest by the current Archbishop Belisarius. This conquest led to a weakening of the Italian republics and Loch Herman, enabling Nyorwa to seize the Mediterranean more easily. Serbia, Armenia, Sakartvelo, and the Karabid Khanate are not important to the story in the slightest. Grand Khazaria is a steppe kingdom built upon a Khazar elite, lording over a highly diverse lower class. This region was historically held longest by the Khazars, but the Mongols came and demolished everything in the 1200s. By the 1400s, the old elite has recovered, but is now facing festering unrest. Its current Khagan is Borsablishku. Rus is the current incarnation of Russia. The region has historically been split between Kievan Ruthenia and Novgorodsky Rus. The two realms have been warring and conquering each other in waves for centuries. For the moment, Novgorod is the center of power. It is currently ruled by a woman, Tatiana Skinsky, or Tanya Kestny, daughter of King Vsevolod II and Erika Kestny, the latter being a sister of Yuri Bistri, king of Bohemia from 1456 to 1488. Komiyamya, literally Komiland, is the home realm of the Komi-Permiak imperial state, descended from the massive Ziri Empire, which prior to the Mongols was the largest contiguous land empire in human history, spanning from Finland to uncharted Siberian lands, and from the Arctic Ocean to the Tarim Basin all the way in China. It is currently ruled by Kya II of the Kwazi, known for his incredible military skill. The realm is notorious in Christendom as being the champion realm, though not Holy Land, for the Uralic pagan religion known as Keskia Roskon, or simply Keskon, being where the faith's main shepherd figure originated from in the 1040s. Exiled Poland is a large patch of land owned and ruled by the Polish government in exile. It was established in the 1470s when the Polish monarchy was forced to abdicate by the church for supposed heresy, with the Knights d'Isel moving in to replace them in the region. The Roman government fled east and were given the opportunity by Rus to lease some land in exchange for putting down a rebellion in their northern territory. Crimea is a kingdom with a complex history. Originally a free land, with the king declared in the early 800s, the land was subsequently subdued by Swedes, Lithuanians, Komis, and finally Celts in 1206. The Celtic Empire sought to turn Corymia into a merchant republic a la Norwa, but Dublin pulled crown support for it much more quickly, leaving the area a lawless frontier to be fought over by Celtic upstarts. By 1266, one merchant clan seized power and executed the other clan leaders, and declared their patriarch King of Corymia. But a century later, they were replaced by a local clan which integrated into Celtic auspices to blend in, the Ridala, or Macredal, who were also significant for throwing Sweden into chaos in the 900s, such that the realm had no chance to support the Norsemen fighting against the Celtic incursions in Norway and Denmark. The land remains, even to modern times, as being fraught with religious tension between Christians, Vedas, and Keskas. At the time of the story, it is being ruled by King Burglak, a fair king, but one who is getting on in years. There is a rumor that Odd's clan descends from the man who seized power in 1276, Slevinia, as he was supposedly assassinated by his nephew in 1278, but rumors persist that he fled to Norwa instead and began anew. The name Corymia comes from initial trading contact between the Celts and the Ziri Empire, which held Finland-Estonia at the time Sweden was conquered in 1098. Irish traders asked the Komi delegates in the region what they called the land, to which the delegates responded, Corymia, which translates to Far West Land, and to the Komis, Finland is to the Far West. The traders noted down the name as Corymia, and the name stuck. Litovia is a kingdom also with a long and complex history in the timeline, with it being key to Viking ploys to reach Constantinople. Then it was later held by a former Varangian guard, but reclaimed by tribes which spoke what we would call Latvian, and who colluded with Estonian princes to plot to conquer Sweden and bring an end to Viking raids. The efforts culminated in 990, when Gyrdanis the Brilliant destroyed the Vikings, which usurped his adoptive claim on Sweden through the Estonian-blooded King Arnjorn. Gyrdanis also formalized the Baltic religion of Romuva, and saw it spread throughout the area. This Baltic Empire then stood as an important counterweight to Viking power in Scandinavia, making Denmark ultimately easier to conquer for the Celts in 1018. It then challenged the growing Celtic influence in the area, before a civil war and succession of weak kings met with wars against the expanding Ziri Empire. In the early 1100s, Lithuania was fresh off their fourth civil war in 50 years when a Romuvan priest rose to power and consolidated his claims before directly declaring war on the papacy, which prompted the Pope to order a crusade to wipe the Romuva faith off the map. To the surprise of many, the chief monarch taking up the crusade was the King of Aquitaine, Onfroy, who proceeded to install the Duke of Burgundy, Nicolas Beringling, as the new King of Litovia in 1135. Religious tensions bubbled, but numerous purges over the centuries brought the Vedas to heel. They'd since mostly fled to Sweden or Crimea, with mixed results. Litovia within the story is barely worth mentioning, apart from their role in mediating trade between Norwa and the Komis. The Knights de Selm are an order of Christian warriors who swore an oath of eternal fealty to the papacy, established in the mid-1100s during the rampant wars and persecutions held against the various pagan religions in northern Europe. They also played a role in stamping out the remnants of Slavic paganism, which never found any footing, from within Carpathia, which soured their reputation with Carpathian peasantry, but made them incredibly popular with their elite. The Knights were given a charter in 1451 to stamp out recent Christian heresies popping up due to discontent with the papacy. Initially, the charter was restrictive, but in 1455 it was expanded to allow the order to occupy territory in Europe and expel any nobility thought to be supporting heresy. Using this, they began carving chunks out of Central Europe on mere accusations, but at the official dispensation of the Duke of Padua in Trucia. This is how Poland was excised from their territory. They also occupied a western chunk of Bohemia, with the claimant king essentially manipulating them into suppressing his rival claimants. Soon enough, the leader of this western nexus, Jan Rosneuben, was outed for allegedly committing mass murder on a town for promulgating heresy, so Bohemia reclaimed the nexus at great economic expense. The leader of the former nexus was able to pull some strings and assassinate some princes in retaliation, but ultimately fled and was never seen again. Carpathia, natively Kurpash, is a highly authoritarian monarchy built upon a succession of kings descending from Doman, a son of the Polish king Kosciuszko. This prince conquered the land in 811. They are notorious for having the most stable dynasty in world history, barring the Yamatos in Japan, despite the average life expectancy of Vasils during the medieval period being less than 5 years. They cultivated a bloody court despite turning Christian in 1064. One of the most famous aspects of Carpathia is their state-sanctioned clique of assassin warriors known as Stasas, blades, who have on their own caused drastic consequences in European history. Stasas practice their own martial arts and have been likened to ninjas. In recent times, Carpathia has undergone incredible religious turmoil as a few decades before the story begins, the Vasila, Empress of Carpathia, declared direct fealty to the papacy, which severely fractured her court and began a civil war. The Knights de Selm fought in the region in her favor and destroyed the rebellion, though she was assassinated in the midst of it all, and her son respectfully declined to renew the ties of direct fealty. In exchange, he restored the honor of numerous Catholic Carpathian bishops disgraced by the rebel faction, which in turn allowed the ordination of the current Pope, Vitalian IV. Before I get to the big two and then Yorwa itself, let me knock out the others remaining. Primorja is a kingdom centered in what we would call Pomerania. The region was not very densely populated for centuries, mainly housing roving Germanic or Slavic tribes. In the 1000s, alongside the peaceful acquisition of the Elbe Delta region by the Celtic Empire, many Irish settlers moved into Pomerania to escape Celtic authority and live peacefully. The raids forced them to organize a government quickly, and they successfully began making the region clear and livable. However, the King of Bohemia at the time also had designs for the area and didn't appreciate the raiding barbarians rushing into his own realm to escape the upstart government. So he hired the barbarians and also used his own army to conquer the area, folding it into Bohemia. Out of spite, he also enforced a policy of the Czech language from top down, which irked the Irish settlers. A few generations down the line, the area fought for its independence with the backing of a local Slavic dynasty and became Primorja. In the story, Primorja isn't all that important on its own, though its rocky relationship with Bohemia at the time is worthy of note. After Bohemia bankrupted itself, evicting the Knights de Selm, Primorja forced Bohemia, due to Bohemia gaining a border with Primorja in the conquest, to sign and enforce a treaty which included the stoppage of Czech ships leeching off Primorjan port commerce from Yorwa, closing off a major stream of revenue for Bohemia. Primorja is currently one of Yorwa's chief allies, despite also technically being allied to Bohemia. If Bohemia ever went to war with Yorwa, Primorja would support Yorwa first. Arkona is the island of Rügen, held by the largest mercenary company in Europe, the Arkone Brotherhood. The Brotherhood was involved in limited capacity with the rebel Smargatil, and faces light sanctions for it. Svealand is Sweden, held by a monarchy descending from the Celts. As with all the Baltic Sea, Sweden has a complicated history, being the first Norse realm to unite into a kingdom, but also the first to be conquered by foreigners, Estonians, that faced countless wars, get crushed to the dust by the mighty Baltic Empire, all leading up to its eventual conquest by the Celts in 1098. Much of its early history can be summed up as it could have changed a lot of outcomes if external forces would just leave it be. After the Celtic conquest in 1098, the region came under Woburban administration, though the appointed underking was of a lower clan. After the kingdom gained independence in 1141, a cadet branch of the Woburban seized the throne back. In 1496, the land is ruled by Queen Elgith Woburban, who is married to King Vítislav of Bohemia. Elgith is a tenuous ally of Yorwa, but she does not have control of her military, who answer to Vítislav. Bohemia is the big one. The entire external conflict of the novel is intertwined with recent Bohemian history. After King Yuri fought off the western Selmschleiter Jan Rosneuben, Bohemia went bankrupt, exacerbated by the concessional treaty with Primorja. Yuri decided to then invest in foreign crops, including recently discovered tobacco, but was defeated in all his ventures. Eventually, he decided to take out a loan from Yorwa, but then died in his old age. His son Vítislav then took the loan money and invested in tobacco through a proxy, Ubras Smargatil. As mentioned, Bohemia is ruled by King Vítislav, who is by all accounts a cruel man, who stays in power by putting on a strong facade for the church. He pulls strings with the church to initiate damaging inquisitions into Yorwa, causing several internal problems. Finally, the Republic of Yorwa is the setting of the novel and one of the most prosperous realms in Europe. Having largely avoided the religious turmoil afflicting mainland Europe, Yorwa, through trade and shrewd politics, has secured a long period of both outward and inward peace under the Proxium Orgel Morga. Yorwa began as a merchant republic after the Celtic Empire finished conquering Norway in 959. Over the next few decades, the republic struggled to find footing, as it also repelled Viking retaliations, but eventually it also took Denmark in 1018, all under Celtic supervision. Also of note was when the area was settled by Irishmen, Welshmen arguably contributed just as much to the building of the Republic, but they were usually sidelined and treated as second class. This bubbled beneath the surface for centuries. While a vassal of the Celts, Norwell found himself at odds with the Republic of Loch Garman, which in law was usually given precedent for all trade contract claims. Norwish lords then kicked up a fuss enough that the Ard Righ personally gave them independence, which initially damaged the Republic, but they pulled through and began growing properly. The Republic grew strong in the 1300s until it fell in a civil war over the power of the Proxium and the powers given to merchant lords. This is often given the name Dead Man's War because it was ostensibly started over an unsolved assassination. The resulting peace terms fostered an oncoming golden age for the Republic, though it still had its setbacks. Timber was becoming a commodity as more buildings were built and more paper was written on and later printed, leading to a scramble for solutions. A cartographer named Art Dobagach found one. They must seek the mystical land of Vinland. This led to the discovery of the New World in 1457. Initially, the prospects overseas were slow going, but through the 1460s things grew significantly, with weak oversight. In 1472, colonial goldsmiths in what we call Nova Scotia lynched a prominent merchant lord, Ugo Bohemslach. In response, the Republic created a task force to sail to the colonies, root out the growing brigandry, and establish order. This force was championed by a trader's overguild high sentinel named Gillian Sendach, and his right-hand man, who is often said to have done most of the heavy lifting, was Ubras Smargatiel, of Old Welsh blood. The colonies were sorted, and the colonial vanguardship system was instituted. This led to a boom in military presence in the colonies, which unfortunately led to a disaster in 1474, when a miscommunication led to a colonial slaughter of Mi'kmaq natives. The Proxium of the time, Loprit, led an embassy to the colonies the following year to issue a massive apology and gifts. This, however, was seen as a gross misuse of the central fund by some in the Merchant Council, namely Araldur Mogalda, Paul Mogonkabrot, and Iman Wadogum, who led a successful coalition against Loprit in 1477. This booted Loprit from the Inn seat in 1480, replaced by Araldur, who became Orgel Morga. Also in 1478, Ubras Smargatiel helped lead an expedition into the Caribbean and, among other things, discovered tobacco. To supplement colonial costs, the 1480s saw a push into Mediterranean trade by the Overguild, culminating in the creation of the Great Salt Route, going between Hadra and Bergen, cutting out the Italian republics. This set off an elaborate conspiracy headed by Falgus Mormorkara, Dukeman of Loch Garman, to imprison the delegate responsible, one Av Maklodvega Slovenia. The young upstart already had powerful friends, however, so he got out of harm's way and helped take down the Mediterranean conspiracy. Towards the end of the 1480s, Ubras Smargatiel, now with backing from unknown sources, began leading rebellions to challenge the Norwish establishment, which continues to oppress his people of Gwynedd stock, despite his contributions to the Republic. Amidst the first rebellion in 1489, a hostage of his, Oswald Wadogum, Iman's brother, died in captivity. Details are scarce, but this shocked the Republic to organize an army to destroy Smargatiel. Av Slovenia was appointed to head this new army. Smargatiel escaped and attempted 2 more rebellions. His second was hardly a true rebellion, but involved him trying to make landfall in hostile territory, while the third and final rebellion saw him allegedly burning down churches and sacking innocent towns, including some mainly of Gwynedd stock. The first novel, Sanguine Frost, begins at the very end of this rebellion, in January 1496. A blizzard swept across the Nordfjell, and Smargatiel has no more mercenaries or loyalists. So he makes his last stand, as Oth hunts him down.